Welcome back to the Witchy Concoction Spooky Tutorial. In this section of the tutorial, we are going to script the magic, which is the effect that happens on this part when the player has it equipped in their hand. And we're going to use a tween and the Tween Service to do this. So a tween is used to animate an object's properties. Okay, so on the tools that I have stored in replicated storage in the shapes folder, each tool has this script inside of it. It's a local script, and so right here you can see I've already got it in the tool. So I'm going to insert a local script, which is what you need to do, and we will write this script. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is set up the variables. Local tool equals script.parent. Local image part equals tool, wait for child, image. And remember, when we open up the tool, we have a part inside of each one of them named image. Okay. Next, we're going to do the particle emitter setup. So first we're going to create a variable for the emitter. Local emitter equals image part, find first child of class particle emitter. Whoops. Do that again. Find first child of class, and inside the parentheses, quotation marks, and then particle emitter. Okay, we don't already have a particle emitter in the part. We are now going to set up a new one. So we're going to do an if statement that says if not emitter, then, and inside of this if statement, we're going to use instance new to create a new particle emitter if one does not exist. So we're going to say emitter equals instance.new particle emitter. Okay, and we don't need to put local emitter because we already defined the variable outside of this if statement. Emitter.rate, so now we're setting up properties for the emitter. Emitter.lifetime equals number range dot new 0.5 comma 1.5 is going to be the range for the lifetime. Emitter.speed equals number range dot new 1 comma 4. Emitter size equals number sequence.new, and some of this should look familiar to you from when I showed you how to set up the properties of a particle emitter. So when we went through that, I told you that you could set up an emitter in script, and this is an example of that. Okay, of setting up an emitter via script that doesn't already exist. And if you play around with the properties, if you put a particle emitter in Workspace and just play around with the properties of it, you can learn about all of these properties and what you can do with them. Okay, so I'm using a texture ID from one of my decals, and the decal that I used, if I go to my toolbox and I go to my inventory, I have a little potion bottle that I made, and I simply inserted my decal, and then I looked in the color map content to get the ID number. So you just copy that number and then pasted it. Okay, so you can use whatever decal you want to use that you have access to. Emitter.transparency equals numbers sequence.new emitter.light emission equals 0.8 emitter.enabled equals false emitter.parent equals image part. Okay, so we're starting with the emitter not being enabled because we're going to enable it later on in the script. Okay. Okay, next we are going to set up the tween variables. Local tween service equals game get service tween service. Okay. Now we're setting up a Boolean local spinning equals false. We're going to set up a function for the tween. Local function start magic is what I decided to call it. Okay. So remember, a function is a block of code that we call later on in the code, and we can call it whenever we want to, as long as we call it after we've defined the function. So I'm writing my function right here. So when I call the function, I'm going to call it by writing start magic, open and close parentheses, whenever I'm ready to call it. I'm not ready to call it yet in the script, but I just wanted to show you. So we're going to turn spinning to true. And then we're going to do a while loop. While spinning do. So I haven't shown you a while loop yet, but what this means is the entire time spinning equals true, the code inside of this while loop will continue to run until spinning is false. Okay. Alright, and I'm just writing a little note. There are going to be two parts to this tween. One is going to be a pulse up and the other is going to be a pulse down. Local pulse up equals Tween Service :create. Okay. Image part is the part that the tween is going to be done on. Tween info.new, this is where we set up the tween. And when you set up a tween, there are 6 things that you can set up inside of these parentheses for the tween info. And they go in order. So the first thing you'll set up is time. The second thing you set up is easing style. The third is easing direction. The fourth is repeat. The fifth is reverse. And the sixth is delay. And you don't have to always set up every one of those, but you do have to stay in order. So time is always in the first slot. Delay is always in the 6th slot, which is the last slot. So if you want to set up a delay, you do have to go through all 6 of them and set all 6 up inside of the parentheses. But if you only want to set up the first 3, you can only do time, easing style, and easing direction. Okay, and that is what we are doing. So this is going to be 0.5 for the time, enum.easingstyle.sign. We're going to use sign. And then the enum.easingDirection is going to be out. If I do not define the other 3, then they just default to the automatic defaults for the Tween service. Repeat would be 0, reverse would be false, and delay would be 0. Just the automatic defaults that Roblox already has them set up to. Okay, then on the outside of the first closing parenthesis, put a comma, and then you're going to do opening and closing curly brackets like you would do for a table. And this is where we are going to define any properties of that object that we want to change. And we're working with the image part. Okay? And remember, the image part, and I just realized I misspelled this, so I'm going to fix it. The image part is this part right here on the tool. Okay? So these are the properties, okay, of that tool. So whatever property you want to change, you type the properties. So I want to change the size. And then you put an equal sign. And then, whoops. And then we type image part dot size times 1.3. And I have a lowercase. You needs to be a lowercase I for image part because that's how my variable is set up. Okay? And then, separated by a comma, I can now change the next property. Color equals color 3 from RGB, open and close parenthesis, and I'm going to set it as 255, comma, math.random 150, comma, 255. Then outside of that parenthesis, comma, another math random 150, comma, 255. That's going to randomize the color. Okay? And then at the very end of that, you should have 2 closing parentheses, then a curly bracket closing, and then a final closing parenthesis. Whoops, I accidentally put a slash when I hit enter. Okay. Okay, the next thing we're setting up is the pulse down. So local pulse down equals Tween Service :create image part tweeninfo.new open and close parentheses 0.5 enum.using style dot sign comma enum dot using direction dot in. Then outside of that closing parenthesis, a comma, and then the curly bracket, and then size equals image part dot size. Okay. Okay, next, play the 2 tweens back to back. Okay, we're still inside of our function. So we're going to say pulse up colon play, and this tells it to play. Then pulse up dot completed wait then pulse down play and pulse down completed wait. So it's going to pulse up and then it's going to pulse down. And because we're in this while loop, it's going to continue back and forth repeatedly. Alright, and then we're going to set up a rotation. So image part.cframe equals image part.cframe times cframe.angles (0, math.rad) open and close parentheses 15, comma 0. So what this says is rotate this object by 15 degrees around the y-axis, because in the x I put a 0, in the z I put a 0, but in y I put math.rad, and in the parentheses I put 15. So math.rad is used to convert the number 15 into the math language that Roblox needs, because C-frame doesn't really recognize our degrees of 0 to 360 degrees. So math.rad converts it so that it knows what 15 degrees is for the script. Okay. Alright, so we're done writing that function. For the tween, now we're going to write some other functions. Local function stop magic. Okay. Well, to stop this, we need spinning to be false. So we're going to put spinning equals false. So this is turning the toggle switch off. Local function stop spin. Okay. Spinning equals false. Some event functions, and remember, event functions, we don't have to call the function because it happens when the event happens. Okay, so when the player equips the tool, we're gonna call the function that we set up here. And that function is start magic, which is going to make the tween start whenever they equip the tool, which is when they take it out of their backpack and then they put it in their hand. We're also going to change the enabled property of the particle to true. So emitter.enabled equals true. And then we're going to call the start magic function. Okay. And then when the tool is unequipped, we're going to do an event function. So when they place it back in the backpack, we're going to change the emitter to enabled to false. And we're going to stop the magic. we can stop the spin as well. Because we set these two functions up here. Okay, that was to stop the magic, that's to stop the spin. And this is to change the emitter to false. So you can see where we used a bunch of functions and how we're calling them later in script using an event function. So let's take this script, it's in the antler, and I'm going to make my old script disabled so I can test the new script we just wrote to make sure it works okay. And I'm going to test play. Go over here and get that antler part, and that's this one, the blue one, and I'm going to equip it, and it's working as intended. Unequip it, everything is done. Equip it, everything turns on, and so the part is spinning. The part is pulsing back and forth, and it's emitting the particle. And there we have it. So that is the end of this tutorial, and I hope you learned a lot of different concepts that you can now play with, and that you have a good general understanding of quite a bit of concepts that are used in the experience development and in writing script for Roblox experiences. Thank you for joining the tutorial, and I hope you have as much fun as I do in your adventures of creating on the platform.